What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake, Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there for Week 12 fantasy football. We're talking about quarterbacks, who we starting and who are we sitting. I mean, we're trying to get these videos out as quick as we possibly can. We know there's a lot of players playing on Thanksgiving Day with those 3 games, so we're trying to make sure you have the information as soon as humanly possible. But we're going to get right into the Week 12 matchups here today. But before we do, let's see how we did in Week 11. Week 11 was another week over 70%, so I'll absolutely take it. Out of the 25 quarterbacks we gave a start or sit designation to that completed their games this past week, and 18 were correct for an accuracy percentage of 72%. Some of our biggest misses: Matt Ryan came off his bye and absolutely blew. Lamar Jackson just barely missed that 18-point threshold. Tom Brady struggling just a little bit. Some of the biggest hits, though: Derek Carr came out, he put up some big numbers. Big Ben continues to cook. And then Kirk Cousins, he didn't let me down. I talked about him in the show last week about I just had to start Kirk Cousins, and he came through for me with a big performance there for the Minnesota Vikings. But now, who can we count on in Week 12? Let's take a look at all the matchups. We're going to kick it off on Thanksgiving Day with the triple header. The first matchup's going to be between the Houston Texans and Detroit Lions, and I still don't know if Deshaun Watson is getting enough credit for what he's doing here over the past 5 or 6 weeks or so. I mean, if you take out the bad game that he had against Cleveland, where they dealt with some horrible weather, even had a weather delay to even start that game, he's averaging 31.5 fantasy points per game since Week 5. He hasn't even thrown an interception in over a month, not since October 11th. And then you add in the fact that he's going to get you right around 30 to 50 yards rushing a game, the occasional rushing touchdown. It gives him a great floor on a weekly basis. Now a matchup going up against the Detroit Lions, who allow right around 19 or so fantasy points per game. Plus, there's no running game in Houston right now, right? No David Johnson, and Duke Johnson is absolutely sucking it up, which means they're going to rely on the passing game a little bit more. Luckily, the majority of his weapons still healthy, and that gives Deshaun Watson a great opportunity at another big game. He's for sure going to be a start for me. On the other side of the football in Detroit, for Matthew Stafford, still iffy, right? I mean, obviously his hand not 100%. Doesn't sound like he's going to have Kenny Golladay once again. And here's where it makes it really difficult. He's finished inside the top 15 quarterbacks 3 out of his last 6 weeks. Not bad. However, the games in which he didn't, he finished outside the top 20. So he's either going to be really good and he's going to be really bad. Going against Houston, they allow right around 19.5 fantasy points per game. Not bad. I just think there's safer options out there this week than Matthew Stafford. Had Kenny Golladay been 100% healthy, had his hand been 100% healthy, maybe we're looking at this a little bit differently. Just too many question marks, too much risk. I'm going to have to sit Matthew Stafford. Second game up on Thanksgiving, Washington football team, Dallas Cowboys, the matchup of Alex Smith and Andy Dalton. Now, had this been 2013, maybe I'd be a little bit more excited than I am right now, but I'm just not overly excited about either one of these guys this week or maybe even going forward. Alex Smith just doesn't have that touchdown upside, right? They're just not in the red zone enough. He doesn't have the scoring opportunities enough. He's very big play dependent to get those scores, and we just haven't been seeing them. He only has 2 passing touchdowns in his 3 games played, but yet has 4 interceptions. And yeah, even though that Dallas does allow right around 20 fantasy points per game, Alex Smith is going to hover in that low-end quarterback 2 range just because there is no ceiling there. If we could see him go out there and put up 225 and 2 or 3 touchdowns on a weekly basis, then we're talking about it. But he's nowhere near those numbers right now. He's getting the yardage, just not the touchdowns. Going to have to sit Alex Smith here this week. For Dallas, I mean, Andy Dalton looked better in week 11. Well, let me rephrase that. His wide receivers made him look better. I mean, CeeDee Lamb out there making some ridiculous catches. But these two teams just faced off in Week 7. In Week 7, Andy Dalton against the Washington football team went 9 for 19 for 75 yards, no touchdowns and 1 interception, and finished his quarterback 27 overall. Yes, he looked better last week. I'll give him that. But I'd like to see it in back-to-back games before I trust him in my lineup down the home stretch heading towards the fantasy playoffs. If he puts together a great game again here this week, we may start thinking about him going forward, but I got to see it first. For now, I'm going to sit Andy Dalton. Now, the next game up was supposed to be the Thursday night Thanksgiving Day nightcap, right? Baltimore Ravens, Pittsburgh Steelers. Well, news is just now coming out that this game is going to be postponed and moved to Sunday Night Football due to some COVID implications, which could definitely change the course of this ball game if some of the players who are going to be inactive can now be active. So we'll pay attention to that. We'll keep all the late breaking news and we'll keep it updated for you guys here as soon as we hear anything. But for now, so much for the momentum of Lamar Jackson in the passing game, right? Because last week he was right back to the normal stat line of 186 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, right around 50 yards rushing. it's great, right? It's a safe floor. We kind of know that more times than not, he's going to cross that 18-point threshold, and he found some success in Week 8 against this same Pittsburgh team, where he threw for 208 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, and had 65 yards rushing. The problem with those numbers there is he only completed 46% of his passes in that game, which means he's very big play dependent because he wasn't going to be overly accurate. But that's no surprise to a lot of people. We already knew that with Lamar Jackson. The Pittsburgh Steelers only allow right around 15 fantasy points per game, but Lamar's still going to keep that safe floor. He's going to hover right around 18 fantasy points per game as a floor, and he's not going to kill your fantasy team. He's just not helping you win a weekly matchup here quite too often in 2020, but he's still going to remain a start. For Big Ben, he's staying hot, and he's going to remain a start. He's got 11 touchdowns to only 1 interception in the month of November, 3 straight top 15 finishes, and with the likes of a Juju Smith-Schuster, Deontay Johnson, who looks like a solidified wide receiver 1 at this point. You got James Washington, Chase Claypool, Eric Ebron sprinkled in. Do they use the running game in James Conner? All those options, I don't care how great the defense is on the other side, they can't stop them all. Big Ben's got options, and he's going to remain in the start column. Time to move on to Sunday football now. Miami Dolphins, New York Jets, and Tua coming off of a benching, right? Last week, benched and pulled for Ryan Fitzpatrick, not because he's out there throwing picks all over the place, because he's yet to throw an interception on the year. He just didn't look that great last week, and they decided to pull him. Are they trying to send him a message that, hey, everybody's expendable? Possibly, but how does Tua respond to that? Does he come out and really take the reins of this offense and come out on fire this week? Honestly, I think he probably does, but I need to see it first. I need to see that bounce back first before we trust him back in our lineup. He just doesn't have that NFL body of work where he's shown the adversity and the bounce back yet. We haven't seen it from Tua in his very young career. So I'm going to give him somewhat of a pass to say, hey, let's see how he responds first before just saying, yeah, the guy's just no good. Now, on the other side of the football with Joe Flacco, he's got a NFL body of work. It's more like a dad bod, I guess you could say, because it's Joe Flacco, and he hasn't really done anything too crazy for a long time. But what absolutely blows my mind is he's passed Joe Montana on the all-time passing yards list. Joe Flacco. I mean, that's just absolutely crazy to me. He does have 5 touchdowns to 2 interceptions over his last 2 games. He's playing okay. But despite a rocky Week 11, the Miami defense isn't that bad. They are very much improved this year under Brian Flores, and I expect them to bounce back also. Do I want to start Joe Flacco in fantasy football Week 12? No. No, I do not. On to the Arizona Cardinals, New England Patriots, and by no means do you ever sit Kyler Murray. I mean, maybe if his arm falls off. Then you think about it, but I mean, look at last week, right? Let's take last week as an example. He underperformed. It was not a great game for Kyler Murray. He had a season low in rushing yards with only 15, yet he still had 23 fantasy points on the day. That's a bad day for Kyler Murray. Yet we're not going to sit him here against the New England Patriots. He did bang up his shoulder slightly, but doesn't sound like he's in jeopardy of missing the game. Maybe they limit the deeper throws down the field for a week. Maybe we kind of rely a little bit more on DeAndre Hopkins underneath. That's kind of what I'm expecting here this week, but he's obviously going to be in our lineups. For Cam, I mean, he showed that he could produce in the passing game last week, right? Because it wasn't on the ground where he got his points, which was somewhat surprising. He threw for 365 yards and only rushed for 6 yards. Now, Arizona allows right around 21 fantasy points per game, 7th most in the NFL, but does Cam lose some of those rushing opportunities because they're playing catch-up in this game? Does Arizona get a lead and they can't rely, on running the ball with Cam Newton? Possibly. Does Sony Michel come back? Do they actually activate him for the ball game and maybe he takes away some of the rushing upside? Because we know Cam's not going to go out and throw for 365 every single week. So we have some questions surrounding Cam Newton. He's going to remain a start for me, but he's a little bit more of a risky start. He's kind of fringe top 12 quarterbacks for me, more of a borderline QB1 this week in Week 12. But with the rushing upside on a consistent basis for the most part outside of last week, he's going to remain a safer floor play with the opportunity to have a higher ceiling if he has to throw the ball. Panthers and Vikings, and finally a victory with Kirk Cousins. That's what I'm talking about. Kirk, way to go. I couldn't pass it up last week. I had to list him as a start, even though I was a little bit worried about it, but it paid off, right? Kirk Cousins finished as quarterback 3 overall last week, throwing for 314 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, yeah, we should probably be thanking Adam Thielen for a lot of that, but still, It's a package deal, right? And that's what we like to see. Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, they're utilizing the weapons in this offense. And the biggest issue here is surrounding Adam Thielen, right? Does he play this weekend? Being on the COVID IR, can he clear in time to play? Sounds like the possibility is there. However, it's still unknown. Kirk Cousins really needs Adam Thielen to have a potential ceiling day on any given Sunday. I mean, right now the Panthers are allowing right around 18.5 fantasy points per game, but if there's no Adam Thielen, I'm really not as interested in Kirk Cousins as of right now because he hasn't been ruled out as of yet. I'll start Kirk Cousins here again this week. Thielen sits, more than likely I move Cousins to a sit. For Carolina, I have a question. Is PJ Walker better than Teddy Bridgewater right now? Is he the better option right now? I mean, should they just let Teddy rest and get to, back to 100%? Because PJ Walker didn't look half bad. A lot of people may have seen him play in the XFL and knew kind of what they were getting when he got the start, but he went 24 for 34, 258, 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions, and he spread the ball around to everybody, which was amazing because for the first time, all the options in this offense were viable for a Sunday. Usually Teddy, has 1 or maybe 2 options on a weekly basis. They just don't spread it around enough. PJ Walker did, but it sounds like Teddy Bridgewater is going to get a chance to come back in and play, something we need to pay attention to. Minnesota does allow right around 20 fantasy points per game, but honestly, if Teddy Bridgewater plays, I prefer to sit him until we see him closer to 100%. If PJ Walker goes out there and plays, honestly, I may start the guy this week. We just got to wait and find out who's going to be under center for the Carolina Panthers. Browns and Jags now, and basically Jake Luton has thrown the job away. He had an opportunity to be a starter the rest of the season, just couldn't do it, right? Had 4 interceptions last week, had a horrible game the week before that also. Now Gardner Minshew is eligible to return, but at the time of this recording has not been named the starter yet. Doesn't matter if he gets named the starter, will I start him? Probably not. I mean, I'm not saying I dislike Gardner Minshew or the matchup that much, but there's just a lot better options this week in Week 12 than Gardner Minshew coming off an injury, going up against the Cleveland Browns. I prefer to go other directions. There's just too much risk involved. I mean, is he really 100%? How is this offense going to look? Does he just immediately take back over and start where he left off from? He didn't leave off from the greatest spot either. When DJ Chark wasn't overly involved, we need to see where this goes first before we trust Gardner Minshew. As for Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns, they just aren't throwing enough, right? Which we kind of knew going into the season. Baker, a little bit more of a game manager. Now, he hasn't had more than 25 pass attempts in a game since Week 7. The focus in this offense will continue to be on the running game. However, not a bad matchup, right? Jacksonville does allow over 23 fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. That's 3rd most in the NFL. The ceiling just isn't there. The floor, somewhat safer for Baker, a little bit lower than you would like to see, but not a horrible start if you're in a 2-quarterback league. He has been outside the top 25 for 3 straight weeks now. I prefer to sit him. However, if you're in a 2-quarterback league, then I don't hate it. It's a good matchup. They're just not throwing a whole lot in Cleveland to make you super excited about starting Baker Mayfield. Titans and Colts, a matchup of 2 teams who just faced off like 2 weeks ago. In that game, Phillip Rivers got the better of Ryan Tannehill fantasy-wise, but that's understandable, right? Indianapolis gives up the 3rd fewest points to opposing quarterbacks, while Tennessee gives up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. But during this tough stretch of games for Ryan Tannehill and the Tennessee Titans, they've really been more reliant on Derrick Henry and volume on the ground. Ryan Tannehill hasn't had more than 31 pass attempts in a game since Week 6. The volume just isn't there. Similar to what we were just talking about with Baker Mayfield. He's still an okay start this week. More of a mid to high-end quarterback too. Not the safest play, not a smash start by any means. This is something that if you have no better options, you roll with. In a difficult matchup, I don't love Ryan Tannehill, but I'll keep him in the start column barely. For Phillip Rivers, the usage of Michael Pittman here as of late is really helping out his numbers. Michael Pittman looks like a great option in that offense. T.Y. Hilton is almost an afterthought at this point, and now Phillip Rivers has back-to-back top 15 finishes. He threw for 300 yards, 1 touchdown, and no interceptions just 2 weeks ago against this Tennessee team. And honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he did that again. I'm going to start Phillip Rivers here this week against the Titans. Giants and Bengals now, and the loss of Joe Burrow sucks. I mean, really sucks. And not just for the Bengals, it sucks for fantasy football too, because we lose a lot of value with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, maybe even A.J. Green at time, because Ryan Finley is just not that great. I mean, we've seen him under center in Cincinnati before with similar weapons, and it didn't turn out good. Can we really expect that much more? Not fantasy football-wise. He's definitely going to be a sit. But for Daniel Jones, I kind of have that Kirk Cousins feeling like I had last week. Like I got to start Daniel Jones. I haven't started him all year, but I have that feeling for Daniel Jones. I mean, Cincinnati just had their heart ripped out by losing Joe Burrow. Any chances that they had at winning games rest of the season were rested on the shoulders of Joe Burrow. Without him, they kind of know that we're not good. That's going to be an issue going forward. Do they come out with any intensity? We got the Giants coming off of their bye week. You have Daniel Jones, who's shown rushing upside. I think he's still the fastest man in the world the last time I checked. Plus, he's got 3 out of 4 straight top 15 finishes. That on top of the Cincinnati Bengals allowing over 20 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. I got to do it. I'm worried about it, but I'm going to start Daniel Jones. Chargers and Bills, and this one's a no-brainer. We're not spending too much time here because you're still starting Justin Herbert and Josh Allen, but I'm just glad to see that the power of Herbert's game wasn't in his hair because the kid still looked great after the haircut last week. He's now finished as a quarterback 1, inside the top 12 for 7 straight weeks and has at least 3 passing touchdowns in 6 out of his last 7 games. Still starting Justin Herbert. Same can be said for Josh Allen, right? Coming off his bye week, he's had back-to-back top 5 finishes in fantasy football. The Chargers allow over 21 fantasy points per game, and he's got tons of weapons to throw it to. We're not overthinking it. We're starting Josh Allen and Justin Herbert. Raiders and Falcons up next, and finally, Derek Carr getting some much-needed attention. In fact, he's going to be my Manscaped must-start of the week. Make sure you head over to manscaped.com this weekend from Black Friday through Cyber Monday. Huge sales on their site. Use the promo code Headliners, all caps, at checkout and receive an additional 20% off and free shipping. Don't miss out on all the great deals here this weekend over on manscaped.com. But back to Derek Carr. The guy is playing great football. I mean, is he out there putting up Mahomes numbers? No, he's not. But for what he is, he's helping a lot of people out. He now has 19 touchdowns to only 3 interceptions on the year. He's had at least 19 plus fantasy points 2 out of his last 3 games, and he's utilizing Darren Waller and Nelson Aguilar, but there's still room to grow in this offense because we're not seeing a whole lot of Hunter Renfrow. We're not seeing a whole lot of Henry Ruggs. There's other weapons in this, offense that he's yet to tap into, and once he does, the numbers are only going to go up. Now, it's a lot harder to run on Atlanta than it is to throw on Atlanta. They give up 27 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, most in the NFL. You take into account the limited turnovers from Derek Carr, the safer floor, yeah, he's going to be a start for me this week against the Atlanta Falcons. For Matt Ryan, he came off the bye week last week and totally blew. But this is a much better matchup for Matt Ryan here this week going up against Las Vegas. They allow over 20 fantasy points per game, 9th most in the NFL. The issue for me here is Julio Jones. Does he play? Because if he doesn't, we've seen what that Matt Ryan looks like without Julio Jones. I kind of tie the two together. If there's no Julio this week, I'm sitting Matt Ryan. If Julio's out there on the field, Matt Ryan's back in the start column. Niners and Rams next, and we know we're not starting Nick Mullins, right? We don't need to talk about Nick Mullins too much. He hasn't really given us many reasons to want to start him. Plus, they need a lot more healthy weapons in San Francisco before we think about it. But let's talk about Jared Goff. Does he watch? Jared, do you watch this show? I think Jared may be a member of Headliner Nation, and we just don't know it because look at this Instagram post from just the other day after their ball game. He calls Robert Woods Bobby Trees. Well, I've been calling him Bobby Trees for a few years now. Maybe he watches the show. I don't know. Jared, if you're out there, hit me up. Let's talk some football. It'd be super cool. But let's get back to the matchup here this week against the San Francisco 49ers. It's a lot easier to throw against San Francisco than it is to run on San Francisco, which is perfect. Why? This offense in LA looks a lot better when they focus on the passing game. It's when they try to get all 3 running backs involved that the offense kind of stalls at times. None of those guys are getting lead back role, carries and volume. They can't establish anything in the running game. It's different running styles. It's different play calling. But when they focus on the passing game and Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods and the 2 tight ends, this offense looks a lot better, and that's where they need to continue to go if they want to continue to find success. Jared Goff has over 300 yards passing and 2 touchdowns in 4 out of his last 6 games. And honestly, I'm hoping they build off the momentum of last week and getting that passing game going. I'm going to start him here once again in week 12. Saints and Broncos now, and Taysom Hill, the quarterback. Not that bad, really, right? Lower passing volume, rushing upside. That's kind of what we were going to expect with him, right? That didn't catch anybody off guard by any means. And honestly, we can probably expect a lot of the same going forward. Denver allows right around 19 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, but Taysom Hill isn't just a normal prototypical quarterback We know that. That rushing upside gives him that safer floor and really makes him startable on a weekly basis. Plus, he loves himself some Michael Thomas and is going to pepper him some targets here in the passing game. Honestly, I have no issues starting Taysom Hill this week at the quarterback position. As for Drew Lock and the Denver Broncos, the struggles continue, right? He now has 5 interceptions to only 1 touchdown over his last 2 games played. They're just not on the same page, right? Him and his wide receivers, they just can't seem to get things going consistently in Denver. Plus, it's a solid defense there for the New Orleans Saints, allowing right around 18 fantasy points per game. Honestly, until there's more consistency in this offense as a whole in Denver, can't trust Drew Lock. He's going to be a sit. Moving to Kansas City, Tampa Bay, the matchup of Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, and there's just going to be offense everywhere, right? I mean, playmakers all over the field. You got Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Le'Veon Bell, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones. I mean, all over Gronk. I didn't even name Gronk. I mean, there's people all over the place on both sides of the field. It would not surprise me if defense just goes completely out the door here this week in this ball game. Now, over the past few games, Tom Brady really struggling to connect with his receivers on those deep routes, just barely missing it. But it's Tom Brady, and it's a bunch of veteran wide receivers. You have to think that they figure that out. This is a great opportunity against Kansas City for them to put it all together and put up some big numbers in fantasy football. I'm going to start Tom Brady. For Mahomes, yeah, I don't care that Tampa Bay plays tough against opposing quarterbacks because it's Patrick Mahomes and it's the Chiefs. You start him regardless. The guy is just, destined to have 300 yards and 3 touchdowns almost every single week. You can't ever sit Patrick Mahomes. Bears and Packers, and I'd like to sit up here and say, hey, we're going to wait and see on Nick Foles before making a decision. Let's see how he responds if he's activated from that hip injury. How is it going to, hamper his practice here this week? But it really doesn't matter either way. I'm not going to start Nick Foles regardless. He's yet to finish inside the top 15, and it's just not something I'm willing to risk it on here in week 12. As for Aaron Rodgers, though, yeah, I'll start Aaron Rodgers here once again. Despite back-to-back games now with 1 interception, he has 5 straight games of at least 275 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. It's a tough matchup going up against Chicago. They only allow 15.5 fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks, which is 4th best in the NFL. The ceiling may be limited slightly than for Aaron Rodgers this week, but do not be surprised if he goes out there and looks for Davante Adams and MVS a lot this week to quiet a lot of the people that gave MVS so much crap after last week's performance. Still a safe floor for Aaron Rodgers, going to remain in the start column. Last game of the week then, Seattle Seahawks, Philadelphia Eagles, and has Russell Wilson just finally cooled off after starting the season so crazy hot? Because he hasn't finished inside the top 10 now in 3 straight weeks. Over his last 2 games, he has yet to eclipse 250 yards passing and only has 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. Now, for the first 5 games of this season, Russell Wilson went out and threw 19 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. Over the last 5 games of the season, 12 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. It's just starting to trend the wrong direction, Russ. We need you to turn it back around. Going up against the Philadelphia Eagles, they allow right around 18 fantasy points per game, and you really can't afford to sit Russell Wilson. His floor is right around top 10, right? We know what you're going to get on a weekly basis, and plus that offense is still clicking. The numbers could have been a lot better last week had DK Metcalf made a couple crucial catches, especially in the end zone. So I'm not going to hold it against Russ. He's still putting up big numbers, going to remain a start. For Carson Wentz, dude has lost it, right? Why? There's only really one reason why I can think that he's actually lost it. Maybe we gave him too much credit early on because he always seemed to produce with lesser weapons, right? When all of his top guys were hurt is when Carson Wentz would play better. Maybe it's because he didn't have options and didn't have to make decisions on his own in the pocket. He didn't have options. He was force-feeding somebody, whether it's Travis Fulgham or Greg Ward or whoever it was. He knew where he was going, so he didn't have to think. Now that he has options, he's spending too much time in the pocket trying to find the perfect one. Maybe dude's got FOBO. I have no idea. Maybe he's worried about fear of better options after the ball leaves his hands. Whatever it is, he's playing horrible football as of right now. A matchup against Seattle sounds great, right? Because the Seattle defense has been horrible the entire year, but they've started to improve here over the past couple weeks. But honestly, for Carson Wentz, he's going to be near the bottom of my top 20. He's somebody who I don't start unless I absolutely have to. And if it's a 2-quarterback league, I hope that I have better options because Carson Wentz, until he can turn things around, is just hurting fantasy teams everywhere. All right, those are my starts and sits for the quarterback position here, Week 12 fantasy football. Hopefully that helps make some decisions a little bit easier for your fantasy football teams. We want to make sure we tell you guys happy Thanksgiving to all of you and all of your families out there. Be thankful for what we do have. It's been a horrible 2020, but let's end it on a good note. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we look forward to talking to you guys Saturday night on the live show where we give all the latest up-to-date information on all things fantasy football. Hopefully you guys enjoy Thanksgiving, enjoy watching some football, enjoy the turkey, and we'll talk to you later.